Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and here from Davos, Switzerland, the 56th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. It's the largest they have ever seen. It's almost 1,000 CEOs. It's some 65 heads of state. Almost the whole G7 is here. You can't shake a stick without bumping into somebody that's making a big global decision. And yet the feeling is crisis, particularly crisis here in Europe, as the United States, President Trump, is making strident demands that the Americans must own Greenland at a time when the Europeans are fighting Russia in Ukraine. Their economy is not performing particularly well, and they feel like they cannot increasingly trust their principal ally, the United States. But here's the question, is are you FAFO or are you TACO? Because that's the big debate for countries around the world right now in responding to Trump. You've got some countries that are FAFO. They effed around and they found out. That is, of course, Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. He thought Trump was bluffing, turned around he was not, and now he sits in prison in New York City, while the rest of his regime is playing by a very different tune, that being played by President Trump on energy, on other issues as well. President Xi Jinping in China, on the other hand, is TACO. Trump thought that he could get China to capitulate when he put major tariffs on the Chinese. It turned out he couldn't. The Chinese gave back just as good as they got, and then they also threatened to shut down critical minerals to the United States. That was going to shut down big pieces of the American economy. What happens? President Trump goes to meet with Xi Jinping. He backs down. He talks about a G2 between the United States and China, and the Chinese are in a much stronger position with the U.S., and with a lot of other countries around the world that are working to engage more with them because they find the Americans less reliable. That was Canada Prime Minister Mark Carney making his big trip to China just over the last several days. But where's everybody else? Ukraine feels kind of FAFO. That's why President Trump, who really wants a ceasefire, is forcing them to capitulate day in and day out. The Russians, much more powerful than the Ukrainians, Trump doesn't push as hard. Not because he likes them or he trusts them, but more because they have much more power to resist President Trump. And so ultimately, most of the pressure has been against the Ukrainians. But this is the challenge for Europe, because the Europeans may think that they're the most important ally of the United States, but Trump perceives them as firmly in FAFO territory. And the initial responses we've seen from the Europeans have been fairly mixed. You have several European leaders that are saying they are suspending the EU-U.S. trade deal and that they need to see tariffs in return to the U.S. for the ones that the U.S. is threatening the Europeans with if they're supporting Denmark. But then you saw the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer come out and say, no, this is just performative. We're not going to retaliate with any tariffs. Trump loves hearing that. Divisions in Europe as opposed to a strong united EU makes it easier for him to get what he wants from individual European states. That includes potentially Denmark. And yet Denmark is a trusted ally of the United States. They've increased their defense spending. They fought side by side with the Americans in Afghanistan, had as many soldiers die per capita in that fight as the Americans did. But what have you done for me lately? Doesn't matter for Trump today. What he wants to know is how can he get Greenland. Just wrote a letter literally to Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store of Norway saying, well, because you didn't give me a peace prize after creating peace in 8 different conflicts, some of which, like Armenia and Azerbaijan, weren't actually fighting at the time. But nonetheless, now I'm going to focus not just on peace, but what's best for the United States, which apparently Trump was not doing before. And that means I must have Greenland even more than I did before. In other words, Trump is coming to Davos to meet with a lot of European leaders at a time when he is threatening to rip up the transatlantic alliance and to engage in undermining the territorial integrity of one of its closest, albeit small, allies. Now, if that's the way this ends up, it's the end of NATO. The real question is, can Europe be more than a collection of smaller allies? Can it act together? And that's an important time for them to do so, because this is an issue that is not popular in the United States. It is the idea of taking Greenland is strongly opposed by most of the country. And there are a lot of redlanders and bluelanders in the United States that would care a lot more about getting checks than Greenlanders that are far afield and aren't American citizens. So ultimately, if the Europeans push back hard, this is an issue that I think you're going to see a lot of Republicans publicly breaking from the American president, something I've already heard from some of those Republicans privately about a lot more concern and criticism than what they're willing to say on the public stage. That's where we are for now. Everyone waiting for President Trump and a bunch of his cabinet and hundreds of other folks in delegation to show up at Davos on Wednesday. We still have a couple days to go before that. We'll see where we go. That's it for me, and I'll talk to you soon.